Our next speakers are a group, which is actually a homeschooling class. But I'm just going to introduce Jim Laurie, their teacher, who's one of the founders of Bio4Climate, and who is going to give us some good examples of keystone species and species of all sizes that are keystones in maintaining water cycles and maintaining the cycles of life on the planet. So, Jim?
Hey, I want to give a cheer for Michael and Walter for coming up with this idea, because it really has helped me think about how we're going to do this thing. And I look at the 21st century as becoming the century of restoration, and this is my evidence here. Jane Hammer started this homeschool last year. She asked me if I wanted to teach. She rounded up kids from many different towns. None of these kids come from the same town. We meet 3 hours a week on Thursdays, and we just have a really good time.
This is only part of the group.
And this is only part of the group. There's 5 of them this year. Last year we had 6, and they were amazing. And Annie and Linus were in that group. And what we're trying to figure out is, how do you teach kids as a symbiosis team and not with the idea that they're competing with each other? So, you know, give me some feedback on that. But so yeah, we have Linus Erickson from Medford, and he's going to play the part of Big Blue Stem. So stand tall. We have Jamila DePeza Kern, who's going to play Mycorrhizal Fungi, and she's got a big job. And then Annie Selly is going to be Buffalo. And Jamila's from Natick, and Annie's from Concord. So I don't know. I thought what we'd do is we made these slides. Now remember, I have spent 30 years trying to figure this out. They have spent 3 weeks putting this play together. So give them some slack, and if you got some ideas, help them out later, you know. So I grew up on Lake Erie. Here's a picture of near where I grew up. And Michael had that number about how all the water we're losing. Well, in cubic miles, it's about the size of Lake Erie or 2 every year for the last 60, 70 years. Imagine how much that's drying out the continents. And, you know, Lake Erie's a pretty big place. You know, I thought so as a kid. So I'm going to kind of, how do I move these? Okay. So this is what we're hoping everybody knows about in terms of what, you know, you should be pretty psyched about this, and some of the advantages of infiltration. So I wanted to bring the experts in infiltration with me. So who wants to take this on?
Sure. So I'm representing Big Blue Stem, and so as you can tell, when there is Big Blue Stem on the ground, its much deeper roots allow the water to get through the soil much quicker, allowing the rain to get into the soil and stay down there much more effectively than, for instance, corn, in which case it takes the water to get down into the earth like 30 minutes compared to the 10 seconds with the blue stem. And even with like normal turf grass, like the Kentucky bluegrass, it takes also considerably longer, 7 minutes.
Can you get to the next slide?
Yeah. And here, Peter Donovan is doing some tests on just normal campus grass, and on average, it takes 48 minutes just with that turf grass for an inch of water to get through the soil.
So that's like what we're doing in suburbia. You know.
Looks green, but it's not necessarily infiltrating.
So here we see this photograph of the Ice Age. And back in the Ice Age, there was 180 CO2 parts per million in the atmosphere, which is too cold for life as we know it now. But it allowed these large animals to be the nutrient arteries of the world back then. So they were going and spreading their fertilizer absolutely everywhere and just making everything very fertile. So
Too cold, though.
yeah, too cold.
Right. And currently, in Texas, the CO2 is approaching 400 parts per million, which is too hot, and rivers such as this Red River near Childress, Texas, are completely drying out.
That's a river?
And here are some other examples of totally dried out areas.
This is cotton. You probably recognize that previous one. So, and do you see any dark matter in that soil? Not a lot.
And what's going on, what are the farms, how are they growing those plants?
Oh yeah, nitrogen fertilizer and other chemical products which are quite poisonous to beneficial insects and other plants.
Ah,
So in this lovely slide, we see this is about pre-1800 when the carbon in the atmosphere was about 280 parts per million, which was just right. So we can see in this slide there's many different species of plants and lots of different animals, and it looks beautiful. Looks like a nice place to live. So now that we see this nice picture, we're gonna go delve in deeper and sort of examine some of the different species that we see closer up.
So as big blue stem, I photosynthesize, and I need sunlight, CO2, and water to make glucose, which is sugar and energy. And I have an energy budget, and basically I will send 1/3 of this glucose to make new upward growth, and 1/3 to enlarge my roots. And I will also spend the last third giving that to the mycorrhizal fungi and other soil microbes in return for other important nutrients that they can give. And as you can see here, the big blue stem root is very deep. It almost approaches 10 feet. Compared to the Kentucky bluegrass, it can cover way more territory, allowing the nutrient cycle to go much deeper. And here is an actual comparison.
where is that?
This is a
Smithsonian?
yeah.
That's currently on display at the National Botanical Garden in DC.
And there's other benefits of having deep roots. It keeps the soil together, and as you can see here, this one area where the big blue stem was allowed to stay rooted in has kept the soil together, whereas all the other territory, the topsoil, has just been swept out to sea. And here in Texas, using holistic management, they have used bluegrass and blue stem, oops,
It wasn't always there.
right, it wasn't always there, and now that they have planted it, this green area is now come into reality.
This is out actually near the Pecos River. And they hadn't had grazing there for years, and they had almost no grass at all. And this was about 3 or 4 years after that. And it rained pretty good, but they didn't know blue stem could show up out that far. Well, it historically did. The other picture was in New Mexico. And they thought, well, big blue stem wasn't something from around there, but it seems to show up when you get the grazing right.
So you don't plant it, it just doesn't?
No, they never plant anything. They don't spend the money on it. It doesn't fit with their budget. So.
Yeah, pretty much.
So, thanks to my friend Big Blue Stem, I get the sugar energy so that I can search for phosphorus, sulfur, and other minerals and water to trade with the Big Blue Stem. And I create a lot of slimy stuff called glomalin it's sort of like glue to hold the soil together and to keep it together. And I can trade minerals with lots of different species, different kinds of plants, which is pretty cool. And I just spread out, so it's a lot more surface area than if there was just roots.
So mycofungi, is this are you an intelligent process?
Very intelligent. I'm highly intelligent.
She often knows just what the plants need.
I'm very smart that way. I'm like brain tissue. Yeah. So aggregate the soil to make micropores for the water to infiltrate the soil better. So here we see a root of Big Blue Stem, and then the sort of clumps that clumps together so that there's spaces in between the soil for water to run down and infiltrate the soil better.
Thank you, Lenny Armstrong, who's right. Raise your hand, Lenny.
Yes.
Lenny's been drawing these things and trying to imagine what's going on down there, and it's been really helping us because we're giving feedback and we're trying to figure it out.
That's Lenny's picture.
All right, so thanks to my friends Big Blue Stem and Mycorrhizal Fungi, a lot of sugar is drawn out of the CO2 in the air, and it can feed me, and I am a buffalo. So I eat a whole lot of Big Blue Stem, and I only take the top thirds of the plants, so that, because by then I've sort of left my dung all over the place. I don't really want to hang out there anymore because it smells bad, and I smell a big patch of grass a little farther away, just full of sugars and sweet-smelling things. So I sort of wander over that way and leave the trampled, fertilized section of land behind. So that creates a lot of fertilizer and returning the nutrients to the soil. And before 1800, there were 60 million of me all over the West, and every square foot of soil out there each year got 4 hoof prints. And each of these hoof prints created a hole in which water could gather and things could congregate in this hole and sink down into the water table. And that's a whole lot more surface area for less evaporation and more sinking and more infiltration. And so all of my dung and my fertilizer that I'm leaving everywhere is 876,000 million tons of dung deposited every year, and that is free of cost, as Jim pointed out just then. And all of this dung is great for my friend, the dung beetle.
Is it getting stinky around here? I think it smells good. I've been looking for this because I use her dung for my babies, and where I like to do that is down in the ground. So I get the dung, collect it, take it down under the ground. It's gone, no flies, more holes. I make the mini pores that help the water go down. And I take the carbon down and I feed my babies, and we're all happy. They don't have to smell it anymore. You don't have to smell it anymore. So we're talking numbers. 2,000 dung balls from each buffalo chip. If you've never seen a buffalo patty, it's as you imagine, this big thing. And if I weren't here, it would be sitting around for a while. So we make lots of dung balls, and that means lots of mini pores. And those go down 2 to 3 feet. So if we figure about 500 holes or mini pores per patty. And how many of us are there? Maybe.
I wonder if there's more on the next slide.
Ah, I didn't memorize all these numbers. 206 dung beetles exiting in 6 minutes.
That was in Texas, in Oklahoma, actually.
So that's about a square foot, right?
Yeah.
So 4 hoof prints per square foot,
This is a
206
cow-
dung
this is a
beetles.
cow patty, yeah, this is a cow patty, but they went out and counted dung beetles, and they said, well, they can put down about a ton of manure per acre overnight. And I said, well, that's a pretty round number, and Pat Richardson, she said, Jim, we only had a summer, give us a break. There were a lot of dung beetles going into the ground. And,
People have said they hear them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So what's
So what else is going on? So we've got hoof prints, we've got, so those are sort of macro, mini, and millipores, or micropores, I guess is what we're calling it. Yeah. So where's the water going? Jim, you want to take that one?
Dung beetle, take it. Dung beetles are starving all over the world. And in Cambridge one time, somebody in front row asked me, well, what do they eat? And out west, they would always laugh, but at that day, nobody knew what to do. But you guys know how to laugh, so that's good. But there, you can see the babies there.
Cozy, cozy. So actually, I could live all over the world, just like you. That's my range. I don't really like the real cold areas.
Permafrost is really hard. Yeah.
Oops, am I giving away the next one?
Okay, so now who's
So I'm introducing somebody who makes really big holes.
That would be me. So I'm also representing the prairie dogs, which they're very cute, first of all. And they dig these holes, which go down 12 feet deep, and they're called macropores. And there can be lots of them. So in this one Texas town, there was 400 million prairie dogs, and the prairie dog town was the size of Ireland. So it's a pretty good size. And so in that prairie dog town, there was 15,000 dogs per square mile. And I'm also, I feed hawks and owls and foxes and ferrets and coyotes, which is not great for me, but it's good for them, so it balances out. So, yeah, we're good to have around.
yeah, some of the other critters that we haven't even talked about?
Yeah.
So,
All right. So this is sort of to recap all the important things that we touched on. So first thing we can start with is back to big blue stem.
The big blue stem sends its roots down where it'll get all sorts of nutrients from the mycorrhizal fungi, and then will get eaten by the cows and buffalo.
Yeah, we eat all this stuff and we spread the nutrients back onto the land, and it really brings the water down into the land with all the holes that this process makes. So,
And I come in and move the poop down in the ground, make more pores.
that's why we see this beautiful landscape back before 1800. It's because all of these animals were working together to create more holes in the land to bring the water down and really sit in the water table and feed the plants, which feeds the animals, which feeds all the bugs and all that. So, and this is where the water is not in the land because all of the animals and the bluegrass is gone. This is a dried riverbed, right?
yep, that's right.
The Red River.
Isn't that where that big, huge prairie dog town was?
Yes, the prairie dog town was right in there, and now that all the prairie dog holes are gone, the water can't sink farther into the land. So.
I've had more than one farmer out there, rancher out there, say that the prairie dogs always go where all the best grass is. And that's why they think they're a real problem, and I'm just not sure they are, because you'll always have grass. It's amazing to me, this river was half a mile wide when I went to college in Texas. And this is in November, this is after the rainy season. They get a lot of rain in the summer, but it's just not, it's running off in a few days and it's gone. There's no infiltration. So yeah.
All right.
South Dakota?
Yeah, so this is where my relatives, the cows, are. And these cows, as you can see, there's not 60 million of them. And they're not trampling down this entire landscape and then leaving it to rest and regrow. They're sort of gently grazing, and all this grass is a missed opportunity for all of the animals that could have returned all that nutrients down to the soil again.
What do you see here? See these trees growing. What does that tell you? Oh, okay. I'll let you take it.
Oh. Well, yeah, that means there could be a stream there if there was better infiltration and the water table was rising, but you need spongy soil for that, and if there's no biological cycles going on in all of these soils, then it's not going to happen.
This is at the Lakota Reservation in Cheyenne River. This is where Michael was showing us some pictures before, right? He's been out there. Okay. Do you know these folks?
I think you know them better.
This is Dugan Bad Warrior, and he's very fascinated by the Dung Beetle story, and he's reducing the amount of chemicals he uses on his animals because he's hearing that the flies will disappear if stuff's all buried. He's real excited about that. He's also real excited about the possibility of beaver coming back. They have a big problem with that because a beaver is a pelt, and it's a high unemployment area, and it's $100. But it could be worth more. It could be more valuable to try doing something else. This is Red Shin, who was here last year. He's the best grazier in Massachusetts, and he's made beef that's all grass-fed, that's got omega-3s to omega-6s of about 1 to 1. It's the healthiest meat I've ever heard of, and they're grass all their lives. So yeah, something you got some more stuff to do.
Yeah. Keep rolling.
So I'm also representing the beaver. Here is a tree that has been cut down by beaver. So this is territory that could be pretty much improved if there were a beaver here. As you can see, the little stream here is kind of dwindling out, and if we had beaver there, then the beaver would be able to enlarge that riverbed and allow more water to stay in there, rather than just evaporate.
What do you see happening here, any of you?
That's erosion. And if there was some big blue stem there with nice deep roots, it would be able to keep the soil nice and all kept together. So basically the solution is just leave it to the beavers. As you can tell with the Bit Dam, it raises the water level, and so we have much more water staying in ponds and streams and rivers.
What's happening here?
Maybe you want to explain that?
What's really cool about this is the audience can kind of try to figure this stuff out too as we're going along. But and I think Carol Evans, I really want her to talk about this. They're seeing these big holes in the ground like you showed that they had, that when beavers show up, they're kind of filling in. And I think there's a lot of carbon in there because the beavers store a lot of stuff for the winter because they can actually eat wood. You know, they can eat other green stuff. But I wonder how much carbon is in this stuff that's building up. And maybe that's a project you guys will work on as restorers.
Yeah, and contrary to many people's opinion, the beaver actually covered a lot of territory before the Europeans almost hunted them to extinction. And they just really increased the water supply in all of these areas, North America and most of Europe, and a nice sliver of Asia. So yeah. And so here, this is the average annual rainfall in the United States. As you can see, Nevada is has the shortest amount that it's getting. But nonetheless, in Suzie Creek in Nevada, in 1991 it was pretty dried out. But since the return of the beaver, the water has increased vastly, and grass is able to grow much more productively and to the benefit of all those critters around.
And who helped make that? Besides the beaver.
John Griggs and Carol Evans.
Hey, raise your hand up there. So, okay.
So come back
and
after
what-
lunch.
What's that?
So come back after lunch to hear them.
Come back after lunch. They're the first speakers after lunch. 1 o'clock, I believe, if we can get going on time. But what else is there? I think Andy and I have some more stuff to do.
All right.
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
Whoops.
Sorry.
So we've got
Put
some.
that together?
Yeah. So we've got some quotes. 300,000 square miles is a tenth of the total land area of the country where once beaver built wetland.
And we have forgotten that beaver wetlands once enlivened the now arid rangelands of the West. So that really helps with biodiversity.
Right, and few other animals have challenged our actions such as much as the beaver has. We drain a landscape, and the beavers build a dam and bring the water back.
There is something in that persistent drive to sustain water on the landscape that is the clue for our own survival as a species.
Whether we take the time to learn from other species depends on our own adaptability and willingness to see our world and the resources within us in a new light. So that's a good thing to remember.
So, yeah, Andy and I were going to
yes.
do something. Andy, what part are you playing?
Well, now I'm a freshwater mussel. So I guess this is a few of me in a rock on the land. And we were going to talk about freshwater mussel because they live in these streams that are now being polluted. This is more of a Massachusetts thing right now, right?
This is actually in South Dakota, and this is just a few feet below the surface a lot of times, and this got washed away in a storm, and we saw all these shells. Yeah, pretty cool.
All right, so freshwater mussels are very important to a river ecosystem because they're the filters of the river. They take in all the pollutants with them. They take in algae, they eat that all, and they concentrate it in their bodies. And they're very powerful little creatures. And they have a very interesting lifestyle that is being obstructed by a lot of human activities. Like they, in order to reproduce, they wiggle around a little fleshy bit on their outsides, and then that looks like a fish. And the fish goes over, and the fish tries to eat the little piece of other fish, and it turns out all of the larvae were inside of that fleshy piece. And so the fish goes and eats that, and the tiny little larvae of the freshwater mussels go in and they stick to the gills of the fish, and then they use that fish to get upstream so that they can sort of populate higher grounds and stay in the same place. And that's their main method of transportation since they can't really move themselves. But with a lot of dams,
This
there's
is
a
really
fleshy
cool.
bit.
Does that look like a fish?
Mm-hmm.
If you're another fish, you come up and you get real close and you think that's something to eat.
Mm-hmm.
And then all the little
Mm-hmm.
Glochidia,
Kittia.
start showing up. So,
Yeah. When you see a video of that, they even like move around like they're a fish. It's crazy. Yeah.
look how beautiful they are.
Yeah. Yeah, so this just describes the gills. But the freshwater mussels are being greatly obstructed by these dams that are being built all over the place because fish can't climb up these dams. and so the mussels can't climb up these dams. So we're seeing less and less mussels farther upstreams, and that gets to be a problem for filtration.
Okay, I'll do this part. Thanks. How'd they do? Why don't you go out and they can see you? You just find a place on the stage where you're not getting in the way there. But that'd be good. Yeah, that's good. Tim Purrington is the director of the Massachusetts Division of Ecological Restoration. As far as I know, it's the first ecological restoration department or whatever in any state. And he wasn't really a biologist, but he was pretty interested in whole systems, watersheds and that kind of thing. And he just thought, what do I need to do? And when I first talked to him, I said, what is your biggest goal? And he said, I want to eliminate 1,000 dams in Massachusetts. And I said, how many are there? And he says, oh, about 3,300. And that's why your streams don't have freshwater clams. And that's a huge part of water quality potential. And someday they will again. It's inevitable. But now there's another story about brook trout. You know, brook trout are the fish we want, but we started having hatcheries because brook trout were disappearing because of all the dams. And they started hatcheries with brown trout, which is more of a European species. And they put so many brown trout in the rivers that people were saying, well, the brook trout is disappearing. There may not be any left. And at some point there was it was either because of budget or protest or whatever, they stopped, the hatchery program. And something weird happened. The wild trout were showing up in streams that they thought they were gone. In eastern Massachusetts, where it's pretty dense, as you can tell. But then they started seeing them in streams that they hadn't seen them before in a long time. And what they're learning about is that these brook trout are actually able to go out to sea in saltwater and go up the coast and look for other sources of fresh water. And they're starting to show up everywhere. So the system is going to heal itself if we can get some of these dams down and heal some of these streams. And this is, if you look up searunbrookie.org, there's a guy in Connecticut that's just passionate about this. And they've already eliminated 41 dams. And I just think that's pretty cool. And here's actually a chart. If your state is eliminated more dams, you get to be bigger. And you see Massachusetts still has ways to go to catch up with Wisconsin. Thank you, Stephen Applebaum in California, which needs to start thinking about how they're going to hold the water on the land. The governor should declare Beaver a citizen and give it the vote. And that's my political statement. But I just thought the homeschool kids, they're learning a lot from this book, which is an AP environmental science book. But I'm not thinking of them as environmental scientists because that's kind of bureaucratic and kind of in the present. But it may help them get a degree as an environmental scientist or a biologist or something and get a job. But what I want them to do is I want them to be restoration ecologists. And the books they're reading now, and they've read a lot of, and it's helped a lot with this presentation, is this book, which is Alice Outwater, Water and Natural History, and a lot of the history's in here. And that blew my mind 20 years ago. And it's all sold out here apparently. They had a few yesterday. And then the other one is Cows. Judy Schwartz, the journalist trying to figure out how the next century is going to happen, and she's got her water book coming out. And this is kind of how we started on our homeschool. And I said, when you want to start, I think these are pioneers. These are like these. I found out in the Boston area there's only about 2,000 homeschool kids. It's hard. But these people, these kids really drive their education, and I'm just really proud of them. So thank you very much. And you, say something. Jane made this all happen.
I just facilitated. It was Jim.